Hello, everyone. Welcome to our newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and Bernhard Gunther. And in this podcast, we are going to be discussing how to work through 5 common relationship challenges that we've basically seen in our coaching, in our group program, Embodied Soul Awakening. And we just see overall that relationships have become more and more challenging during this time of transition. So, people are longing for deeper, more soul-based relationships. We're seeing a lack of relationship skills in people. So we're going to address 5 really important topics that we see are really common for both single people and people in relationships. So there's something in there, whether you're in a long-term relationship or you're just single right now or even dating. But before we go into that, we have actually an announcement. We have a very rare masterclass coming up, a 3-hour live training. It's online and it's about evolutionary relationships and how to use relationships as a path of awakening. And we're going to give you some of the most crucial tools you need to do that. So this is going to be on October 6th at 12 to 3 p.m. PST. If you can't make it live, we're going to send out the recording to everyone. And it's going to be Bernhard and myself. We also have a special guest teacher, a relationship psychotherapist, Leanne Lopinto. And this is really our first time we're going to be offering a 3-hour masterclass on this topic. So this class is for everyone. So whether you're single, dating, in a long-term relationship or marriage, it's going to have something for you. And so some of the topics we're going to get into, one central piece is how can you use relationships as a path of evolution? How to attract and create the kind of relationship that you want. Why do you keep attracting or being attracted to partners who aren't right for you? We're going to address that topic, very common. What to do when one partner is quote unquote waking up, but the other partner isn't. We're going to talk about the more esoteric parts of relationships. So occult forces and influences in relationship, love bites, trauma bonds. And we're also going to really talk about what we feel is the secret to divine union. And it's not anything you've heard out in the New Age community, that's for sure. We're also going to talk about relationship repair and how navigating conflict is like fundamental for growth in relationships. And we're also going to do a demonstration as well, demonstrating a primary communication skill that we feel that you need in order to make your partner feel seen and heard. So if you want to join us, just go to the website Evolutionary Relationships Now. Again, that's Evolutionary Relationships Now. And also you can check out Bernhard's website, veilofreality.com, where he has a poster for it as well.
Yeah, it's evolutionaryrelationshipsnow.com, all one word. And you definitely don't want to miss out on this because, as Laura said, we don't do these masterclasses very often. That's very special. It's a 3-hour immersion with a special guest. And again, it's October 6th at 3 p.m.
No,
12 p.m. until 3 p.m. PST, Pacific Standard Time. And anyone who registers will also receive a recording. So in case you can make it, you will receive the recording as well if you sign up.
Yeah, perfect.
So, excellent. With that being said, let's get into this episode on how to work through 5 relationship challenges. So we're going to go through all of them in together in the first and second hour of this podcast. And they are, in a nutshell, number 1, when one partner isn't growth-oriented and the other is. Number 2, the search for the perfect partner and addiction to romance. Number 3, lack of relationship skills and understanding of the different phases of relationships. Number 4, trauma and self-defeating patterns and beliefs about relationships. And number 5, the twin flame, the new age delusion and distortion and, all this talk about divine masculine, feminine stuff that has become very corrupted and oversimplified in this day and age. So we'll be going through all of these over the next 2 hours. So here we go. Let's start with number 1. That's a big one. That's a very important one. The idea of a relationship, we have talked about this before, needs to be growth-oriented. What does it mean to be growth-oriented?
I think that it means to welcome change rather. I mean, we all kind of, on some level, we do fear change, because it's the ego likes comfort, security, routine, So I think it's people who lean into change and rather than avoid it at all cost, And, what I see with people is that sometimes as well, they become growth orientated within the relationship, and they get into all sorts of self-development or psychology or spiritual topics. And then they try and get their partner to be into those same things. So I think there's a few different factors there. Number one, it's really normal when you get into self-work especially when you read a book that changes your life, to want to share it with everyone around you and be like, okay, I'm working on my triggers. I'm working on my shadow. You also do that. You do that. You do that,
You should.
You should, yeah. Where you get into self-development and you're all gung-ho, and then you try and force it onto others, or maybe subtly get others into it, because you can see how valuable it maybe could be for their life, and maybe it could. But I also want to bring in something that I've also really noticed as well, is that when we get into certain topics, sometimes we can try and force them upon our partner in a way to make them more like us, actually.
Yes.
It's a way to try and actually return to the romantic stage where we're super connected and super into the same things, and there's no difference between you. So there's nuance to this, Number one, it is, if you get into growth and you're in a relationship already, all of a sudden, then you get orientated towards growth. Yes, that can make your partner really uncomfortable, because that wasn't the person you were before you got into the relationship. So there's that piece, and then there's the decision, okay, do you stay or leave in that relationship when you've changed? And then there's the other piece when you get into growth, and then you try and get your partner into the same things, that the interests that you're getting into, as a way to try and make them more like you. So there's different strategies that people use, And then there's also, because personally, I think that if you're orientated towards growth and you're single, you should also be looking ideally for people who are also oriented towards growth, or else it's going to be your worst nightmare, and you're going to be their worst nightmare. But if you do it in a relationship, it's a different story.
Yeah, interesting that as you were sharing this, two things came up. Very true. I think you said at the beginning, really, if you enter a relationship, more what means a conscious relationship, growth oriented, like using the material that comes up for self work. And naturally, when you're in a relationship, more stuff will come up naturally. So, like you said, a lot of people will be driven to do more engaged inner work, self work, or even relationship work, because stuff will inevitably come up.
Yeah.
As I know, when you're alone by yourself, I always say there's only so much self work you can do by yourself, and you can actually get caught in your comfort zone, so to speak. And I think that's why a lot of people also become relationship avoidant, because it's easier to hide by yourself. You can lie to yourself, you have your own blind spots. And like you said, it's important to be around other people who are growth oriented and can act as mirrors, because naturally, even by the act of, how shadow projection works and animus dynamics, it only comes up in a relationship. That's why, and we go in this deeper as well, especially also in our masterclass, in this spiritual union from an esoteric perspective, the growth aspect or spiritual evolutionary aspect can go faster in a committed relationship, because there's more material to work with actually that comes up. Right?
Exactly. More triggers.
Exactly.
More instances where you have to learn how to emotionally regulate yourself.
Exactly. The number two thing you said, it's right, and I can totally turn the mirror on myself. In past relationships, I was definitely looking for somebody who's totally like-minded, this is a trap of like-mindedness. Yes, there needs to some level of looking the same direction, having a certain worldview or similar interests and whatnot, but there can be the trap of wanting somebody who's exactly like us, reads the same books, has the same beliefs, same interests and all of that.
Yeah.
And I've seen this in myself in past relationship, and it came now, it actually, from some level, it comes from excitement of like you said, when we get our people, being able to talk to somebody, and we're excited about this, and we want to have a best friend and lover at the same time, where we can share everything together.
Yeah.
Right. But I can see myself in this type of relationship then almost like I was working with an astrologer back then, and he almost said, even for my setup sometimes, that I'm looking for a clone of myself. It's almost this narcissistic wounding. But in a sense, it was actually coming from my own insecurity of not really valuing myself, right? And needed almost like I needed the validation from my partner to believe and know all this.
It's a codependency thing.
Codependency thing, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where it's coming from. So we need to be very careful not to abuse this idea of especially everybody like-minded, especially with what's happening in the world nowadays. Yes, There's a lot of happening though, certain splitting, and there's almost a timeline split, which I talked about this as well. And it needs a certain like looking the same direction, but there's the trap of, wanting to be completely like-minded on all levels, and we're almost, people unconsciously looking for a clone of themselves.
Exactly. And then one more piece to that is that we have to understand that everyone does, like, we're all in the process of evolution. I feel that really truly. And it can be also involution, where we're destroying something before something new is built, which looks very destructive, but it's involution and evolution, right? But we all grow at different rates, basically, so if you're like a Scorpio Plutonian person, like I am, or Bernhard even, you tend to like gravitate towards what you can work on and grow in. And so you tend to move towards that, but more earthy people actually grow at a slower stage. So it's like, we have to just, this idea of like growth oriented and the other is, I get it, because I do see people can be very fixed in their mindset. And the thing with fixed mindset relationships is that they tend to want like unwavering devotion. Like, you stay the same, I stay the same. You like me as I am, I like you as you am. And there's this hidden agreement that neither of us are allowed to change. And that, again, is people want to stay in this kind of symbiosis. They want things to stay the same, but then they grow stagnant over time.
Yeah.
And so, there's two types of also couples, which you're going to talk about later. There's a conflict avoidant couple who tend to basically avoid even talking to one another about their differences. And then the relationship gets stale and many things get ignored and pushed under the rug. And it not only affects it really affects the vitality of the relationship, but it makes people actually drift apart over time, because you think that in order to maintain the stability of the relationship, you're not sharing the different things that you're interested. You're not sharing your true feelings. And you think maybe unconsciously that maintains the status quo of the relationship, but it actually erodes it over time. That's one couple. And then there's a more hostile, angry couple. I'm using words from a developmental model of couples therapy, by the way. There's a hostile, angry couple who tend to fight a lot, and they fight a lot because they want to make their partner like them. And they get very anxious when their partner has a different opinion or different interests, different views. So we're going to address that later on how to deal with those certain couples, but also to acknowledge that, you can't force your partner to change, and then really be honest with yourself about where you're coming from if you're in a relationship. If you're single and growth is a top value for you, you need to decide that for yourself, Then also look for people who are growth orientated right off the bat, and then also understand they might grow at a different phase than you too. It might take them longer to warm up to certain things or whatever. And then also, one partner changing in a really sincere way can change the system. That's one theory from family systems theory that we know is true. So even in your own family of origin, you changing can actually change your parents, change your brothers, on a subtle level. Bert Hellinger talks about that in family constellation work as well. So just knowing that your change affects the whole system can be really an important concept to understand.
Yeah, because one of the big things we have seen and also heard by the way, our colleague and friend Leanne Lopinto will be also guest speaker at our masterclass on evolutionary relationship. Noticed that in her practice working with people and couples, that quote unquote one person is waking up, the other is not. Maybe it can be related to what's happening in the world and whatnot. There's a splitting within family and friends and whatnot. And sometimes, separation is needed. But what we have also seen a certain like fallacy and projection in that, and kind of abuse of this word, like, oh, I'm doing all the work my partner is not doing. Want to do all this, my partner is not. That can most often stem from a sort of projection onto the other person, or like you mentioned, wanting the other person to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And they're not really applying the work themselves, right?
Yeah.
Or they want to go back to the earlier stage of symbiosis, the romance phase, and and then it tends to starting actually the projections line into really blaming the other partner. Oh, you're not doing this, you're not reading this, you're not doing the work, I'm doing the work. And it's actually not not truly that person is waking up. It's more that person is projecting, not really doing the work. Because like you said, when you sincerely do the work, even one person, it can change dynamic. Because there's the fallacy, like the idea it takes two to tango is quite right, but everybody's in different stages of evolution, different lessons. Even evolutionary astrology shows that very well with the different transits. So we cannot expect our partner to do exactly the same work we're doing. It happens in different phases, and there's a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But what we have seen, and that's really fascinating, even our online program, which we have done for a number of years now, our 12-week program, Time of Transition, about it's all awakening, where we go also relationship stuff, especially go deeper into shadow projection, trauma work. We've seen with some people that also were disillusioned in a relationship. They think they're waking up, their partner's not doing anything. They were blaming their partner at the beginning, and then going through the process, understanding shadow work, trauma work, they realize, oh my God, I was actually projecting on my partner. There's a lot of stuff I need to face. And I wasn't looking within myself. And the more I worked really on myself and applied the work myself, my partner then actually, was then more receptive. It changed in his own way, so to speak, or her own way.
Yeah, I've heard that multiple times. So, there is really it all comes down to your own relationship to growth as well, and your own relationship to other people's growth. Because the truth is that every person grows at a different rate. Every person has even seasons that they get really into growth, and then they might just kind of chill for a bit. It happens even for the most growth orientated person. There's like peaks and valleys all the time. So that's one thing. And then also, like, where is it coming from? Are you trying to make your partner like you? Like, I once had a client where like their partner was really into like breath work and like cold plunges and like saunas and like kind of like the biohacking self work stuff. And she was really into attachment and trauma and all this stuff, and they're both growing, but they're growing in different ways, and they both like different things, And so there can be the tendency to want to like make your partner get into the same ways of personal development that you are, when they also are their own person with their own, journey. And like, some things work for other people and some things don't work for others. So it's important to just understand those nuances. So Am I projecting on my partner and not really doing the sincere work myself? Am I doing this to make my partner more like me? Because we're going to talk about later in the podcast, the importance of differentiation. And then also realizing that your sincere changing can change the whole system and can change the relationship with your partner. And I know that's controversial for some people. And I also want to acknowledge that there's some relationships that are unworkable, especially when there's been like, in intense betrayal or lies or,
drugs,
drugs or abusive relationships as well, But if you really want to stay with someone and you really want to stay in a relation, just really know that you changing can make profound changes for the system and can even inspire your partner to change more too.
And also remember that we had this quote by Liz Green. I think we mentioned it in the podcast. We have it in our course as well, which maybe, I don't know if you have time to look it up, but also really basically in a nutshell, to understand really in light of the people we attract or attracted to, in that any time of our lives or relationships couldn't be any other way. So the fallacy is always to look for somebody else out there, something better, something different. And it also relates to, which we also will be getting into, in a failure to recognize these different archetypal stages of a relationship.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that on the third point for sure.
Okay.
So let's talk about that kind of ties into the search for the perfect partner and the addiction to kind of romance.
Yes.
So, people get really addicted to this idea of their ideal partner, and they also can get very hooked on this romantic phase of the relationship because it's actually like a drug. You get all these good hormones flooding through your body, There's this really intense symbiosis, which happens during the romantic phase as well. And then also, because we're getting this rush of like all these feel-good hormones, we can also get into relationships with people during the romantic phase if we're not discerning, who actually aren't long-term relationship material and don't actually have shared values with us. So I think it's really important to, number one, understand how unfulfilled childhood needs can heighten during the romantic phase and can make you, feel like, oh my God, this is the one, this is my savior, which is actually kind of like a child relating to their ideal parent. So that's one thing we need to look at, the attachment patterns that go up. And then also just, well, the romantic phase is to be appreciated, to understand. And it's also really important, to also, keep your left brain, logical brain online during that phase and really be like, what kind of relationship am I looking for? And what kind of, am I looking for a long-term relationship? And if I am looking for a long-term relationship, does this person have shared values and a vision that can be potentially a good partner for long-term?
Which, out of my own experience, is easier said than done, because I also learned the hard way, so to speak. There's a common rule, like in the sense of, because the romantic phase can also very much basically correlates to positive shadow projection in Jungian terms. You project a lot of stuff, qualities on your partner through this idealized lens, and he or she are not really, inhibiting these qualities. You're just projecting them on them. And the reason you project them, because unconscious, childhood wounds, all this stuff, you look for something to fulfill yourself. You look actually in esoteric terms for your essence. And the stronger the projections, the stronger the romantic high with all the emotional bliss, the butterflies in the stomach, like thinking of your lover all the time, the stronger the fall will, and the disillusionment will come later, right? Because there are a lot of unconscious material is being stirred up, so to speak. And then also on top of it, the sexual connection, all of that, just on a basic hormonal, biological level. So that's being all activated, and that's most often mistaken as true love. I mean, most of the songs, I think we've mentioned it before, that the so-called love songs are just based on this romantic phase, and love hurts and all this stuff, or Hollywood movies and all that. So we have this distorted idea of what actually true, deeper love commitment is beyond the romantic phase. And also I want to mention what Rani, when you were saying that in Gurdjieff's terms or Almas's terms, and when it comes to relationship, you can be really attracted to somebody just based on personality, superficial personality, or sexual attraction, or just physical appearance. And it's just personality attracted to personality, but not be a match from a level of essence, from a level of true self. Mm-hmm. So you can literally, quote unquote, fall in love with somebody who is actually not a good match for you in the long term.
Yeah. And, both anxious and avoidant attachment types can be addicted to romance, and they often keep finding each other. So anxious types tend to dive really fast, really hard in a relationship, often will even have sex really fast, because they use it as a way of maintaining the connection. And avoidant types as well are known for kind of love bombing, and you're the one, but then they go cold after, So I think it's really important to, number one, understand your attachment style and really work on developing secure attachment within yourself if you're single before you get into a relationship, and also when you're in a relationship as well. And then also just be a little bit aware of the romantic phase and how intoxicating it can be. And then just be clear as well. What are your values that are most important to you before you get into a relationship? Literally write them out, and then write out your deal breakers. So if a person has one of these, you are this is a red flag. So, and then the last thing is look at what you bring to the table as well. So you're going in there with a secure sense of the value that you add to a relationship. You're also getting clear on what values are important to you. So whether it's growth, whether it's an interest in spirituality, whatever it is, you need to know what you're looking for, because the romantic phase can hit you at any point in time. If someone reminds you of a past lover, or someone it can just intoxicate you. So you really got to have 1 foot in reality when this phase hits you.
Maybe you quote unquote fall in love with the profile picture on Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. And then you fill in the blanks about who this person is based on your projections, So even understanding your positive projections as well is really important. And then another thing I want to add is that the perfect partner actually doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And you might feel that they're the perfect partner in the romantic phase. But then once you get in phase 2, which we're going to talk about in a moment, the differentiation phase, you're going to realize that, no, this person is actually very different to you. So, it's really important to just really get clear on those values, what's really most, and don't spend some time thinking about this. What I did actually, when I was kind of taking stock of my relationships, is I looked at my relationships and I looked at the things that I loved most about my relationships that didn't work out, but worked at a certain point in period. And then that became my list, you know? And then the deal breakers, I wrote like all of the most like abusive, toxic relationships. I just took notes from that, you know? So like take stock of your relationship history and really see like, okay, like what worked, what didn't work, you know? Just be practical and realistic about it, because it's kind of like similar to the Taurus Scorpio axis, you know? Scorpio, you know, this is in the place where the nodes are right now. But Scorpio is like intense drama, even trauma bond kind of relationships. And the Taurus North Node, which is where the North Node is until February, is about, no, how can we create stable relationships that we nurture over time so they're not like fall hard and fall fast based on shared values. So we want to look for these more stable relationships if you want a long-term relationship. Yeah.
So in that light, also understanding the romantic phase, like I mentioned before, is fueled with positive shadow projections. And then obviously when a disillusionment happens, as it happens, and a romantic phase can last up to 2-3 years, by the way. So many different weeks, months, 2-3 years. Each situation is specific, but ultimately then the shadow comes out, and then we see, oh, my partner's changed, you're not who I thought I was, and all these basic changes from positive projections to negative projection. Then we blame the partner that he or she didn't live up to this idealized image we had, or stuff comes up we were just avoiding, and as it necessarily comes up. But that's the phase of the commitment, of when the work really starts. And a lot of people who are like really addicted to this romantic phase, or just sexual illusion, attraction, whatnot, then they terminate the relationship and then just look for the next fix. And they're like this serial monogamist, so to speak. You know?
Yeah. And then that's also classic avoidance strategy. Avoidants don't like dealing with the hard stuff, and they leave when it gets hard, typically, you know, which sends the anxious person like off the deep end. And then they also go off and do the same, usually as a defense mechanism. So, you know, we want to also look at like, I mean, we're going to talk about it, but basically what happens is the romantic phase binds people together in symbiosis. You feel super connected to them. And then you experience this first disillusionment, this first moment where you realize, whoa, you're very different. You're not what my positive projections thought you were, you know, and that begins the differentiation phase, which we're going to talk about. So couples that don't last cannot withstand the end of the romantic phase and the beginning of the differentiation phase. And it's a huge issue actually in all relationships. You know, couples who break up after like 2-3 years, or sometimes 3 months if they're more intense couples, that's because they met the differentiation phase usually, and then they weren't able to differentiate properly.
Yeah. On that note, we you know, from a spiritual perspective, people have all this idea, which we want to talk about later, idealized version of the divine union, twin flame, and all of that, which we'll talk about later. But from a spiritual perspective, the search for the perfect partner, what people are actually looking for unconsciously, is a relationship with God and the divine, their true self essence. That's the most important relationship. So really, like, if you want to go deeper, if you want to have evolutionary relationships or conscious relationships, it's more about your relationship first, more with God, with the divine, with the higher principle, with your true self and essence. The more you're connected to that, you won't get lost in a relationship. You won't project that much. You won't expect from your partner to fulfill all needs, which most often are unfulfilled childhood needs that weren't met by our parental figures, and we still try to get it from our partner. And if we don't get them, then we blame partner. And again, it goes round and round. It goes with each relationship. Yeah.
So the main point to understand is the romantic phase will end, even though it feels good. Have one foot in reality during the romantic phase. And really, before you go into that romantic phase, get really clear on your values, what kind of relationship you're looking for, your deal breakers, and what you bring to the table, because that will help ground you in reality when you enter this phase. And then, you know, try and stick by what you wrote down too.
Exactly.
So you want to move on to the last piece, because I think this one, I have a lot to say about it, actually.
Don't put yourself, don't...
No. The lack of relationship skills and understanding of the phases of relationship.
Oh, yes. Okay, so let's do that. All right.
Yeah, so the third one, and we're going to get into the last 2 points in the second hour, which is only for members, by the way. So the third point is lack of overall relationship skills and lack of understanding of the phases of relationship. Mm-hmm. So this is like the biggest piece, actually, is that we are really living in an era where we weren't, number one, modeled healthy relationships most of the time. We weren't modeled healthy communication. We weren't told about how to have a difficult conversation, how to express an opinion that's different than our partner, and a lot of our parents actually didn't have the greatest relationships ourselves. So we're really forging new territory here. So we're trying to bring all of this amazing, consciousness we've had around attachment and trauma and developmental trauma and complex PTSD, which is relational trauma. We're trying to bring all of that understanding and healing into this new phase of relationships, which is why we called our masterclass Evolutionary Relationships, because my view is that all relationships actually serve your evolution. And if you get on board with that, then it can actually accelerate. They can be used as a spiritual path, basically. Mm-hmm. But in order to do that, you actually have to have some relationship skills and also understand the phases of relationships so that you don't get caught constantly trying to go back to the romantic phase, the symbiosis phase, this idealized image that happened in the early stages of a relationship. I see that a lot in couples. They're like, oh, we were so amazing when we were in the beginning and we were so connected. They were all into spirituality and now they've changed, So a lot of that kind of languaging is actually I want to go back to that romantic phase. And you can't actually, It was nice while it lasted and you'll get it coming together again, but you're not going to go back. So basically, I'm going to talk about the different phases of relationship. So there's symbiosis, which you've talked about already. So symbiosis happens in the beginning, can last anywhere from a few months to a few years. This is the honeymoon phase. So this is you're deeply in love with person. You can't imagine ever not seeing the same way as them. And we've all been there, but it doesn't last. So that's the first phase.
It is basically the romantic phase.
The romantic phase, exactly. And then the mark of the end of the romantic phase, according to Ellen Bader, which is this amazing couples therapist that we follow, she says that there's this first disillusionment, there's a first fight, there's a first realization your partner isn't exactly the person that you thought they were, and then begins a differentiation phase. So this is the hardest phase, and this is the phase where most couples actually stagnate, stall, or they break up. It happens, the breakup actually happens after a failed differentiation stage. So differentiation is basically when couples start to see what's different about them, and they often struggle greatly in two different ways to get rid of those differences. So there's two different ways they struggle with this. There's a conflict avoidant couple who basically, once they start to notice their differences, they stop talking about certain things and they go cold. And then, if that carries on for years and they never talk to each other about the things that really matter to them, that's one couple. So
basically, they pretend everything is fine and good. They don't want to rock the boat.
Exactly.
There's basic codependency in a sense. On both sides,
exactly. So they're not actually talking through their differences. They're just denying, ignoring, pretending that they don't exist. And they're avoiding talking about a lot of things that are really important to them. And then there's another couple actually called the hostile, angry couple. And what they do is they constantly get into these circular battles about things where one person in the relationship expresses a different point of view, expresses a different interest or whatever. And they secretly under the surface, they're fighting because they want their partner to see things the same way. They're trying to convince their partner. They're trying to make their partner be more like them. So it's a different strategy, but they're both trying to get back to the symbiosis phase. So basically, in this stage of differentiation, you need to learn some way to manage your differences and manage your conflict. So in symbiosis, you're in a we, and in differentiation, you're learning how to live together as two I's, as two people who are different, who have different opinions. And then the third stage is exploration. So this is when you really start to develop and practice your separate selves. You start to explore different interests and needs independent of each other. That's a scary stage for most couples. And if you didn't learn the conflict management strategies in the differentiation phase, that's often where couples really grow apart, and they lose the intimacy and vitality and emotional connection in their relationship in this stage. It's also the stage where Ellen Bader says most affairs happen as well.
So basically, because if they don't do the differentiation phase consciously,
yes,
and have them addressed, here's the thing, folks, you have to understand conflict is natural. a lot of, I want to just point that out because it's a big thing. People in spiritual circles or what twin flame, they think like, oh, once I have found the perfect partner, will be harmony and bliss. There won't be any conflict and fight and none of that. And then if both people actually have this ideal in their mind, they can easily become these conflict avoidant of just like pretending that everything is fine. But a lot of things are happening behind the scenes, under the shadows, and it's being swept under the rug. That's why, again, a length of the relationship not equals quality, because you can live in this almost like a codependent, unacknowledged, avoidant type of relationship for many, many years.
Yeah.
And it's just stale. It's just nothing happens.
Yeah, I see a lot of couples like that, especially couples who've been together for a long time.
Exactly. And so there needs to be this conscious differentiation phase, because for the matters you mentioned, in the exploration phase where it's needed that each partner need to do their own thing and explore and kind of consciously separate in that sense within the container of the relationship, then as you said, that's when the adultery happens, most affairs, or people decide maybe, oh, well, I'm going to be polyamorous and all of that, or one partner is just watching porn and all of that. So that's kind of
exactly,
it's happening a lot, and people not aware of that. So go ahead.
And so just to finish it off, I'll just go through the last two quickly. So then there's rapprochement. This is when couples feel secure enough in their separateness, they are accepting of their differences, and then they begin to turn towards each other. But they turn towards each other now as two individuals. So the connection, it's like you return back to your partner with your newfound sense of individuality, have gone through the symbiosis phase, have gone through the differentiation phase, and then you can turn back towards. And that's when this is the point when you really see couples you very rarely see them, but I've met couples like this where they really love each other. They still hold each other's hands, but they're still unique people, So that's that rapprochement phase. And then there's synergy, Basically, that's the final stage, and this is deeper, more intimate connection. Each person in the relationship knows that they're loved as they are, as an individual. They don't have to hide parts of themselves as they did early on. And then there's this nice mix of independence and interdependence that coexist. And the most important thing about this is that no stage can be skipped.
Yes.
So
these are archetypal.
Yeah. So the skills that you develop in one stage builds on the other and it provides the foundation for the stages that follow. So even the symbiosis phase is actually important. That falling in love romantic phase is important, because if you don't have that, then, and then you move into maybe a more passive avoidant couple, then the relationship will just die, very quickly. But the differentiation phase is the hardest phase. This is where most people break up. This is where most people go into one of these hostile strategies, or they go into these avoidance strategies. And, it's important to understand that, couples don't grow at the same rate, and they don't do it hand in hand. So you may move, into a more different area. You may grow in a certain way. Well, your partner hangs back for a while. Like if you look at nature, that's how nature grows too. It happens the same in humans, So you can't force your partner to grow, but you can take the first step. And it does take, courage. It takes fearlessness. It takes risk.
Faith.
And it also takes anxiety tolerance, because as you grow in this differentiation phase, you actually have to be with the anxiety of actually becoming your own person.
That's a very important point to understand, that we, in a Grow for Your Under couple, when you do your work, that, you're not always going together at the same pace in the same areas. There are different areas that pop up for each individual, because we're very unique individual beings. That's the whole point of the differentiation phase, to see the other as a unique individual.
Yeah.
Not to overlay our projections, get out of symbiosis. Oh, we do all this together. We. And then, I think that's why, I mentioned it before, but it helped me a lot really in that instance to get a better objective understanding, was evolutionary astrology, understanding my deeper lessons based on my natal chart, for example, your natal chart, and then transits that happening for us individually. On top of it, then you have the composite chart and all of that. But it helps to understand that archetypally, or like from this bigger picture perspective, you need to really respect the individuation process that is different for each.
Yes.
Because the differentiation process is almost basically the individuation process for a couple. In the sense.
No, she actually, Ellen Bader specifically defines it as being different, because individuation is a path of wholeness, whereas her definition of differentiation is the active, ongoing process of defining who you are, expressing who you are, revealing who you are, clarifying boundaries, and managing the anxiety that comes from risking sharing your unique self that can either create more intimacy or potential separation. So you take there's a lot of courage and fearlessness, which is necessary in the differentiation phase, because number one, you have to start developing your I and be like, who am I? How do I feel? Because there's all sorts of strategies that the couple will do to try and make their partner go back to the symbiosis phase, to make their partner like them, actually. So there's a lot of anxiety that you have to learn to manage during the differentiation phase, like revealing an opinion that's different to your partner, revealing an interest that's different to your partner, and also being able to have them reveal stuff to you that's different to you, and you manage your anxiety about the fact that this person is different to you as well.
Yeah.
So,
so on that, it reminds me as well, it would probably help with these phases in general before getting into deep relationship to really have a certain, like David Rico said, having already done a certain amount on yourself, knowing thyself, and even connected, even if you do it by purpose or what you're already here to do, so to speak, in a sense. So you don't use the relationship as your purpose, or like you're kind of addicted or dependent on the other person because you have not found your own way.
yeah.
So I think it helps, it will benefit these phases, especially from the symbiosis to the differentiation, when each partner already has something they feel very drawn to, like from a, essence level, what their mark or their purpose in this world to do, so to speak.
Yeah, if you look at it, and that's also why we're starting to do relationship stuff. If you look at it to the Aries Libra axis, which is what we're going to switch into in February 2023, Libra is like the archetype of like marriage, long-term relationships, true equal partnership. But opposing that is Aries, which is about the self, I, what do I want? What do I like? And you have to know the Aries archetype in order to actually get into a truly equal relationship. There has to be two solid I's. So that's what she's pointing towards, is like at this differentiation phase, you need to start asking the question, like, who am I? How am I different to my partner? How am I able to communicate those differences? And it's also about, a huge piece of this is, which there's no way we could do on the podcast, but we're going to do a little demonstration during the masterclass, is about being able to stay in your own center when your partner is sharing an opinion that's different to you, that maybe you don't agree with, without getting overly emotional, without reacting to their emotions, without just changing your mind to agree with them, even though you don't genuinely agree with them, just to keep the symbiosis phase, or get flooded by their emotions. So it's basically learning how to stay in your own center when your partner expresses these differences, actually. So it's secure attachment, but it's secure attachment to yourself and secure attachment in the way that you relate to others. So, when the differentiation phase, you really have to have these strategies to manage conflict and anxiety tolerance in the face of difference. So this means identifying the thoughts and feelings and wishes you have that are different to your partner, developing skills to reveal more of those differences about who you are as an individual without blaming, shaming your partner or trying to make them like you.
Yeah.
And this is like, you really got to rest in this tension, actually, because it will help it will help maintain the intimacy and the vitality and emotional connection in your relationship. But it's honestly not easy. Like Bernhard and I have just gone through this phase ourselves. We are actively working on this phase of differentiation, and it does take some, maturity to work through this phase, because there is a lot of anxiety that can accompany it as well.
Exactly.
And then the last part as well is just developing the awareness that your partner is a different person. He or she is an individual. They have their own history, their own karma, their own thoughts, feelings, belief, and desires. And, it's better at accepting their differences and being willing to, be open to their differences, even if they feel maybe even threatening to you, And so that's the key phase of the differentiation phase. And we're going to go into this in the master class and talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, we go definitely deeper into our upcoming masterclass. Again, if you want to join, go to evolutionaryrelationshipsnow.com. There you can register. It's October 6th at 12 p.m. until 3 p.m. PST, live masterclass. However, anyone who registers will receive the recording. So if you cannot attend it, You will receive the recording if you register. And again, the class is literally for everyone. Be it if you're single, dating, or long-term relationship or marriage, you will get something out of it. So with that being said, this is the end of the first hour, and we'll continue in the second hour of the 2 more relationship challenges, and we have a little bonus after that as well. So in the second hour, we go deeper into trauma and self-defeating patterns and beliefs about relationships. We see that a lot as well. And then also we want to address this twin flame topic in delusion and distortion, very big in the New Age, has even made a comeback along with this whole divine feminine, divine masculine, or these high polarity teachings, which there are some, red flags as well. So we want to talk a little bit about that in the second hour. Again, that's for members. If you're not a member yet, you can sign up at my website, veilofreality.com, and then you have access to all the second hours, and we'd also appreciate your support so we can continue give you value and great insights and material, that's very relevant for the times we're in. With that being said, thanks for listening, and see you in the second hour.